because there's this marvelous site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, yeah.
You know about Göbekli
Yes,
Tepe?
of
Well,
course.
everybody knows about the buildings and the architecture and the sculpture. Everybody knows about it. If you go all the way through the photographs, which the archaeologists unwisely put online, you will find in the middle of one colour plate with lots of other things, a round green stone like a scarab from Egypt. That's to say, it has an arched back and a flat bottom. And on the flat bottom, there are hieroglyphic signs carved in the stone. Right? No one said anything about it at all. But it's clear to me, A, that this was a stamp to ratify where the carvings of the signs on clay or some other sealing material would leave an impression. It must be that. So this is about 9000 BC.
Yeah.
Now, when I was a boy at university, my professor said to me that the reason writing evolved in Mesopotamia because they had complex cities with ziggurats and big buildings and lots of people, and they had to organize everything, and so they invented writing to cope with it. Well, if they had to cope with that in Sumer in 3000 BC, they sure as hell had to do it at Göbekli Tepe, because they've hardly even begun to finish excavating the sites of Göbekli Tepe. They go on like Manchester and Newcastle United. And really, the old rule would be you could not have architecture like that planned and built according to principle with all the different people. You couldn't have that without writing in southern Iraq. So how come suddenly, 7,000 years earlier, they do it there? And that green stone shows that they had writing. That was an official who sealed this, got the stuff, or whatever it was, or it was his dad's name, or whatever it is, got a wiggly snake and a wiggly this. That is pictographic writing. Maybe even as phonetic writing, I don't know, but it was writing thousands of years before in the south. And that's what I think it is. You know, people came with metal from or precious stones from Anatolia. They knew that in the south they had lots and lots of stuff. They wanted to trade. They had to communicate. And it's basically like having a cigarette with an X through the middle. Everybody in the world knows what that means. That they don't know what the word for cigarette is in this language, or cancer, or filter, or tobacco. It doesn't matter. That's pictographic writing. We still use it. And it's above all kinds of mess. And I think that was the prevailing system, because I honestly believe that the people at this time were not stupid. They weren't gorillas. They weren't less advanced than we are. They were probably indistinguishable from what we are. So you have merchants and wanderers and people who see, let's go down the river and see where we end up. And people looking for money, looking for women, looking for everything. But that's surely how it was. But if you look at those Göbekli buildings with a skeptical eye, how it could be. I mean, the finish of it is astonishing, the structure of it, the vision of it. So the workforce and the tools and the organization. You know, what do they do it with? A megaphone, your breakfast, and all that kind of thing? No way. No way.
So that's a really controversial statement.
It is really controversial.
At the time of Göbekli Tepe, they may have been already a writing system.
There was, because the thing is about it that it's a seal to ratify. It's not just a squiggle on a pot and you can say, oh, it's just a piece of this is a finished thing with a flat surface. You press it down, say you have some contract, you have some building arrangement, we paying for these bricks, whatever it was, and the official person had to squash it down, and it leaves the impression. I mean, I'm a great believer in Sherlock Holmes as a teaching system for intelligence and rationality and logic and thinking. I read those stories a million times when I was a kid. And the thing about them, one of the things which impresses me most of all was this point quoted by Holmes, not original to him, that it is theoretically possible to infer the Niagara Falls from a raindrop.
That's a powerful statement.
It's a powerful statement. Well, that seal from Göbekli Tepe is a raindrop from which I infer writing. And it's perfectly possible they all wrote on flat leaves. After all, in many parts of the world, that's what happened. So, for example, in the Indus Valley, people write the most abject nonsense about the Indus Valley writing system, but all we have is seals, basically. So they are also for ratification purposes, and they have the name of the owner in 3 or 4 or maybe 5 signs. And it's probably me, son of my dad, or milkman, or whatever it is. And it's obvious that they had writing on a perishable material. They can't just have had inscribed stone seals. And many parts of India today write on palm leaf. Why should it be any different? So people think, oh, well, just because it's now, it wouldn't be then. But actually, that argument is utterly, utterly fallacious, because the process of evolution is stymied left, right, and centre by inertia. Inertia is nearly as strong as evolution. And this is something that the people who talk about progress and ideas have no idea about.
First of all, your whole line of work, you're making me realize, is a kind of like Sherlock Holmes type of process. The deciphering of the language, archaeology of taking those pieces of evidence and trying to reconstruct a vision of that world. And now you're making me realize that even all the cuneiform tablets we have is just a raindrop compared to the waterfall of thousands of years of
Yes,
humans.
we have a lot, but it's nothing in comparison with what existed. But not only that, see, we don't have to decipher anymore. We can read Akkadian or Babylonian and Sumerian pretty well fluently. That's not a problem. So the information which you can get from these sources, especially 3 millennia of sources, is very, very substantial. Very substantial, but it means that Assyriologists have the inbuilt idea that what we have is something like all there ever was, which is absurd. For example, there's a period called the Earth-3 period, where people lived in city-states. They wrote very small account tablets by the thousand, and there were 2 or 3 major cities where this is the way they lived. People had to bring tithes and offerings, and everything was recorded by what I always refer to and people sympathise with as the ancestors of the inland revenue, because everything had to be written down so that some schmuck could check it and fill out the ledger, and some other schmuck above him could okay it, so there was no funny business or no mistakes. Now the thing is, there are thousands of those tablets written in about 2100 to 2000 BC, thousands of them, about the size of a box of matches. So people like to generalize about the Sumerians at this time of the world, but they probably all came out of 2 rooms, because they were dumped when they were no longer needed in some kind of room. And the archaeologists in the 19th century came down on these, and then all the locals came and they dug them up and they sold them all over the place, and they've gone all over the world, thousands and thousands of them, out of probably 2 storage rooms, which is not a whole culture or a whole country or their whole history or their belief systems. So our view of it is slewed by the nature of the material. And sometimes the material is opulent and benevolent, but not always. And sometimes the people who work with slewed material don't even realize how slewed it is. I mean, it's quite remarkable.
So you, in all your time of studying cuneiform tablets, do you sometimes late at night get a glimpse of the waterfall? Like, can you imagine?
Yes, I can imagine. I can imagine easily, because once in a while a library is discovered. In the 1850s, at Nineveh, which was the Assyrian capital, there was a fat king of the world, called Ashurbanipal, and he had a fantastic library, and he promoted it. He impounded tablets, he had them brought to Nineveh. He wanted all the prevailing knowledge and all knowledge from before under one roof. It was a kind of like Alexandria thing. So he was a trained scholar, and this is what he did. And they found it in the 19th century. They dug it up, Layard and those people. So what did they find? They found the tablets higgledy-piggledy all over the floor of a huge room and in the corridors and everything, and lots of them broken and lots of them burned. So ever since then, until really quite recently, Assyriologists have spent people who work on these Nineveh tablets spend all the time joining the bits together. And you have the story about Gilgamesh and the goddess who falls in love with him in the garden, and she wants to seduce him, and ... you can't find the bit. So you look for another bit, and you look for another bit. And gradually they piece together the literature. And the assumption has always been that if you put them all together again, you'll have the whole library.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the absolute opposite. Because what happened was that the Babylonians in the south, in my opinion, they worked hand in glove with the Elamites from Iran. They had a pincer movement, and they beat Assyria. They conquered Assyria. And they ran through the capital, and they set fire to everything, pinched all the women, and took all the jewelry and all the gold. And people say that in a fit of pique, they destroyed the library. But they wouldn't destroy the library because it was the giant brain from which the Assyrians ran a world empire, and it had all the knowledge in the world. They destroyed that. They spoke the same language. They had the same writing system. They'd have taken them all safely home, cart after cart after cart. And I think what's left there is duplicates and broken things, the things that got drops and everything. And that's what everyone thinks is it. So this is also is a controversial point.
You're just nonstop.
But it's
starting trouble.
It's common sense.
You're going to get both of us canceled today.
But you see the thing. It's predicated on the assumption that what we have is only what there was. And this is such a fallacy. It needs to be attacked